Bienvenidos a la quinta conferencia latinoamericana, SDI 21 MX, un evento que reúne a los más grandes especialistas internacionales en IT Service Management, DevOps, Talent Management, transformación digital, ciberseguridad, blockchain y Service Desk. Agradecemos la presencia de nuestros sponsors. SDI 21 MX. El futuro es hoy. Comenzamos. SDI 21 MX. Nuestros speakers. Marc Hornbeek es CEO y consultor líder de Engineering DevOps Consulting, autor del libro Engineering DevOps, embajador y autor de DevOps Institute. Es experto en la aplicación de un profundo conocimiento de las prácticas de ingeniería para las pruebas continuas, DevOps, DevSecOps y SRE, encaminado a la transformación digital. Es asesor y mentor de DevOps, autor original de los cursos de certificación Continuous Delivery Ecosystem y Continuous Testing Foundations que ofrece el DevOps Institute. Es blogger de DevOps.com, ContainerJournal.com y SecurityBoulevard.com.
Hello, my name is Marc Hornbeek, and I'm pleased to be talking to you today and participating in the SDI 21MX conference. As indicated in the introduction, I'll be speaking about continuous security, that it's needed. It's DevSecOps, which is the popular term for integrating security with DevOps. It's my position that it's in and of itself is not enough. So without further ado, we'll get started. As indicated, I am Marc Hornbeek. I'm known as DevOps the Gray, mainly because I've been involved in DevOps. I think more than most people. I claim I've been doing DevOps for 46 years, long before it was called DevOps, which really just means that I've been involved in automation of the development and delivery process for many, many years. And I'm an author of this book, Engineering DevOps, which is one of the few books that's a prescription for how to do DevOps. I was frustrated that met with many of my consulting clients and people in different fields that are trying to do DevOps, and they're finding out that they're not getting the performance they expected. So this book is to answer those problems and help people evolve from whatever level of maturity they're at with DevOps to get to a higher level of maturity and ultimately to in a fully evolved DevOps capability across the enterprises. I'm CEO and consultant of Engineering DevOps Consulting, which is a small boutique consulting firm. Author of the book, as I mentioned, ambassador and author of the DevOps Institute, and basically do all things DevOps. I'm based in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. Again, I'm really pleased that I'm able to participate in this Mexico conference, and hope to be able to help lots of folks in Mexico with DevOps and related topics such as DevSecOps, continuous quality assurance, and site reliability engineering are the topics that I specialize in. So let's get into continuous security. Continuous security is a phraseology I use in my book to emphasize that security is more than just preparing continuous deliveries to avoid possible vulnerabilities. So DevSecOps is really about making sure that you're not delivering new security vulnerabilities and you're delivering safely. Whereas site reliability engineering is a complement to DevOps, which talks more about what happens in production after deployment. There's a genre of DevSecOps called SecDevOps. I used to think it was just a different name for the same thing, but in reality, I'm now believing that SecDevOps is an important phraseology, that SecDevOps really emphasizes putting security first in the pipeline for deployment to prevent insecurities from being deployed. So it's together SecDevOps as a prevention methodology with site reliability as a production defensive methodology go together hand in hand to ensure continuous security. Ultimately, both need a security first mindset to permeate all the different aspects of development, deployment, and production operations. So it should permeate goal setting, development, and all the things to do with delivery and deployment and operations. There are lots of disturbing trends. You've seen plenty in the news, I'm sure, even recently and over the last year, lots of publications and news items about problems with cybersecurity threats and actions by bad actors. Is getting to be, more and more of a concern. There's sort of a race going on. The cute little diagram on the right side of this slide indicates that the race is really between the bad actors and people that are trying to defend what they have to defend, their different valuables, against those bad actors trying to get in and break things or do some form of sabotage or other ways of being offensive. And there's an acceleration happening. You need to keep running faster and faster to keep ahead of the bad actors that are getting better and better at it. If you look at the boxes on the left side here, you can understand it, because the modern products and services are getting more sophisticated. As they get more sophisticated, they're actually adding new attack surfaces, distributed applications, distributed infrastructures, distributed pipelines, more and more dependencies on different supply chains. Every time the applications or services get more sophisticated and distributed, there are more potential attack surfaces that bad actors can take advantage of. Meanwhile, the actors themselves are getting more sophisticated, so there are more of them. Our attackers are gaining experience, getting more mature in their capabilities. They're even collaborating with each other. And there's plenty of attacker success stories out there where through ransomware or other purposes, they're being successful. So it's quite a race for those that are trying to protect their valuables against all these bad actors and the constant increases in vulnerabilities that are going on. So definitely continuous security has an important role to play. You can think about some of the specific instances of problems even over the past year. One of the most visible ones was a year ago, December 2020, SolarWinds, which is a tool that you can install in your network. Well, people infiltrated the SolarWinds product in order to get access to network traffic. There are literally almost 20,000 organizations that use SolarWinds, and many of those were breached because of that approach to attack. So that was a huge visible attack that still has implications even today. Shortly after that, even just a month after that, Microsoft had launched a whole admission of some zero-day vulnerabilities that also was in the news a lot, with different organizations suffering from attacks. In March, there was the Acer ransomware news item. It's certainly not the only one that occurred in that time frame, but just to give you some example, $50 million demanded from Acer. And only about a month later, there was the agencies being breached by the tool Pulse Secure. And a month later, cybersecurity aspects with ransomware shutting down the biggest gas line in the USA. And more recently, Kaseya ransomware. All of these things are in the news. They're obviously very serious attacks, and a lot of them are very successful. Some of them are still ongoing in terms of their impact. So even though DevOps is really well positioned to help people accelerate their delivery of features and software and even improve quality while you're at it, this concern about quality and security is becoming a bigger and bigger concern. I mean, one could say that the reason that security should be elevated in priority against some of the other things is you think about the blast radius of problems caused by security breaches. If it's a feature problem, generally speaking, that impact is relatively contained. If it's a problem that affects the zone of your deployment network, then it's contained to that zone, or a service is contained to that zone. But a security breach tends to affect the entire enterprise. So there, definitely a higher impact on, an enterprise, not only the enterprise that has been breached, but often the clients of that enterprise as well. So the impact is much broader. So therein lies, the logic that says, hey, security really needs to be treated as very high priority compared to many of the other things that are going on. Meanwhile, even though some of the luminaries of DevOps would claim they were concerned about security from the get-go, if you really look at the history of publications and so on around DevOps, really DevOps didn't give high priority to security early on. Security is kind of a late cover to both DevOps and site reliability engineering. In 2009, it was the official start of the DevOps movement. There were few, if any, experts in DevOps, or even the founders of the word, talked a whole lot about security at that time. 2011 was an interesting book published, Continuous Delivery. It had very few mentions of security, but that was viewed to be a key, DevOps book. The Phoenix Project, which is perhaps the most famous DevOps book, was published in 2013. There was no mention of security in that at all. The DevOps Handbook was a close follow-up a couple of years later. There's a little bit about security in the last chapter. Google published the Site Reliability Engineering Bible, effectively, 2016 as well. There were a few mentions of security. The DevOps Adoption Handbook came out in 2017. There were a few paragraphs on security. Finally, in 2019, but somewhere between 2017 and 19, security started to get more elevated as there were more visible breaches going on. And the role of DevOps with security and the opportunities for integrating security with DevOps started to become better understood. So at the RSA conference, there was a featured DevSecOps. At the same time, my book was published, and I have a chapter on continuous security and DevSecOps practices. The Department of Defense issued their DevSecOps reference design at that point. So by this time, security is getting a lot more visibility together with DevOps. 2020, last year, the Department of Homeland Security issued a SecDevOps guidebook emphasizing the importance of security over, the traditional DevOps, and even over trying to distinguish DevOps from DevSecOps and SecDevOps. And just this year, NIST has issued a set of guidelines that's a reaction to the Biden administration's executive order on ensuring that any organization delivering into the GSA and government agencies have already considered security and are working according to secure practices. So you can sort of see that even though security has such an importance, it's growing in visibility and becoming a bigger and bigger concern in DevOps. I see the same thing with my own clients. Some of my consulting clients start off, they're not really thinking that much about security. They just want to get a pipeline working. And later on, they'll add, the concerns about security. But more recently, security is becoming a topic from the get-go in the consulting arrangements. So I do see a trend myself in this regard as well. The question is what needs to be secured. If you think about pipelines and even the broader spectrum of value stream, everything that is being done from planning through to operations and everything in between, including the CI/CD pipelines, there's a lot to be secured. And this is part of the reason why it's complex. You can secure the applications that are being delivered. That's one thing. The infrastructure upon which they run, the pipelines that are being used to deliver changes, all of those things have vulnerabilities that can be important and need to be secured. They all have planning phases, design, integration, pre-production, and production phases. And pretty much there's a lot of commonality in those phases of what types of things need to be secured. In the application space, it's more about securing architecture and component features. In infrastructure, it's more about the deployment environment and a lot of automation. In pipelines, it's more about tools and tool chains and automation. And as we've seen with like solar, winds, and pulse, it's very important to secure the tools and the tool chains and the supply chain items as well. Those are real surfaces that people can attack and get in. So there's a lot to secure fundamentally. It's not surprising that it's not an easy thing to do. You can look at it from a different point of view, different mindsets. If you're a designer, for the most part, what you're trying to do is create a product or a service that customers want right now. You know, that when you deliver them, that they're going to be wanted and they can sell. For the most part, the framework Agile is targeted to help resolve that issue. And Agile itself, again, didn't initially emphasize security, but more recently it does more. If you think about quality assurance mindset, it's a little broader than the typical design mindset. You're not only trying to verify that a product works now, but that it will work as it was released for a lot of production configurations that are available at the time of the release. So it's kind of broader. DevOps and continuous testing frameworks are really addressing that, the end-to-end aspect of your pipelines and continuous delivery and delivering through deployment environments. If you think about what happens in production, even though DevOps has a big O in there, it's really big D and little o, actually. DevOps doesn't really say a whole lot about what happens in production or in operations, but it does talk about how you prepare for operations. Really, site reliability is what's happening in production. It's the kind of compadre to DevOps. So site reliability engineering is, again, a broader mindset to ensure a product or service continues to work the way customers expect for all possible configurations for the whole life of the product or service, and together with other products and services in the same deployment space or site. And finally, if you think about security as a mindset, it's even broader. So you're trying to defend valuables for organizations that create or use a product or service against both unintended and malicious actions by people in organizations, both inside and outside of the organization, for all production and non-production configurations for as long as there is something of value to protect. So you can see there are several dimensions there that are broader than even design, QA, or ops. So it's not surprising that if you think about it this way, SecDevOps, DevSecOps, continuous security are growing in importance. And, given the potential blast radius of security issues, this understanding of security and implementing ways to protect, defend, and protect new vulnerabilities from being released altogether is becoming a bigger and bigger concern. And it's a concern that requires a very complete solution. And that's what continuous security is all about. So if you kind of look at what's happening with DevSecOps practices, it's all about integrating security practices within the DevOps process. The idea of having culture rearranged so that they're really thinking, everybody in the organization is thinking about security, and implement security as code throughout the pipeline stages and efforts, from design, integration, monitoring, deployment, testing, infrastructure, leadership, culture, all the different pillars of DevOps. You need to have a consideration specifically for security. So engineering security into the design and deployment processes is really critical. Removing security as a bottleneck with continuous delivery processes is critical. After all, you don't want to have to, hold up the production and deployment because everything is being checked at the end and possibly rejected if you don't integrate security as part of the pipeline. That definitely can happen, and it does happen. You really want to bridge any gaps with security practices while ensuring fast and safe and secure deliverables. Replacing siloed team practices with more communication, shared responsibilities of security and controls during all the phases of the delivery process. So that's what DevSecOps is all about, in one chart, if you like. I mean, there's obviously a lot more to it than that, but that's kind of the big picture. SecDevOps, on the other hand, it really builds on the concepts of of DevSecOps, but it's emphasizing putting security first. What does that mean? Is it just another name? No, it means that all team members share equally the responsibility for security, and security policies are designed in from the start. They're always given high priority and very high weight for each stage in the life cycle and at deployment. In other words, security is really not optional, and it's not an afterthought with SecDevOps, whereas DevSecOps doesn't really mention how you should emphasize security, but SecDevOps by definition does. There's an article by Whitesource that addresses this comment, DevSecOps versus SecDevOps, is it just a rose by another name? And of course the article concludes that no, it's not. There are material differences between SecDevOps and DevSecOps, and having thought about it, I think that's correct. There are material differences, and it is worth considering SecDevOps. There's a quote here by Mark Twain that says, to change your life, you need to change your priorities. We really do need to give security high priority, or for the most part, it doesn't really happen. I have seen this myself time and time again with clients that, push back on investing in security so they can do things like accelerate their pipelines or improve, their continuous delivery processes and tooling without investing a lot in security. And, if you don't give it priority, it won't happen. So I actually do believe that SecDevOps is materially important. Meanwhile, after things are deployed, there's a lot of stuff that can be done. SRE practices talk a lot about, security. Security chaos engineering is a discipline to instrument, identify, remediate failures within the security controls throughout the production environments. So you can do proactive experimentation, build confidence in the ability to defend against conditions in production. So that's a whole discipline unto itself that doesn't really fall so much under DevOps, but it's more what happens in production after deployment, typically. There's a concept of purple teams where, purple teams ensure that the simulations of security events with red teams attacking and blue teams defending. The more modern concept that's purple teams is where they work together and automate as they go along, what they find and this again can be led by SRE teams. And it's mostly, activities that are happening in production, which is the purpose of SRE. And another key item that needs to be looked at from within production is having zero trust networks and zero trust architectures. It's a concept centered on the belief that organizations shouldn't automatically trust anything inside or outside a perimeter, and instead must verify everything and anything to connect to systems before granting access. So again, this is a production defensive strategy that SREs and security teams can collaborate on, and they complement what's happening with SecDevOps or DevSecOps. So again, it's the true picture has to be a combination of SecDevOps, DevSecOps, and SRE to form a security first continuous security mindset. This is a very busy chart. I'm certainly not going to go through every aspect of it, but if you look at the middle of it, this is a blueprint for DevOps, and there's already a lot going on. If you just look at this part, right? There's CI/CD, there's a value stream, a lot of tooling, a lot of activities just to implement a flow, let alone continuous feedback or the third way of DevOps improvement. Just to get this all working is a significant amount of work and investment. Of course, these processes don't live in absence of real systems. So having infrastructure, whether it's data center, dedicated infrastructure, or cloud services or other infrastructures being served up as a service to support these processes is also part of what needs to be thought about in DevOps. And of course, all of this is really serving a higher level need to have application releases and automate those as much as possible. So there's a layer here called application release automation that's above the pipeline. And above that, you have value stream management over not only the pipelines, but the planning and operations aspects as well. And you can have multiple pipelines and multiple value streams that value stream management needs to take care of. And then all of that serves things like governance and continuous security, site reliability, disaster recovery. So there's plenty of complexity to deal with just in, I would claim that this is kind of the area of, DevOps that there's no hard definition of DevOps, but this is all related to what people call DevOps. Outside, beyond that scope, if you break down what security needs, every step in this pipeline and value stream and all the different vertical and horizontal elements of it have potential vulnerabilities that need to be secured. So if you think about planning, having the ability to secure requirements from business functionality problems, having user stories in the backlog that are specific to security. There are plenty of tools out there that can help you with that. Things like Cyber Planner, ServiceNow, Jira can help with planning and building in security into the plans. At the design level, whole discipline around threat modeling, collaborating between the security teams and the developers and the folks in the DevOps teams and application development to understand what are the potential threats that are relevant for every application, making these things secure, what the designs need to do with secure coding practices, and again, a whole series of potential tools there to help you with that. In coding, after a design, having development standards, peer reviews, static analysis tools for security, unit testing, analyzing supplied software and the supply chain that delivers them, data masking, the list goes on in coding and testing for new features. So again, there's a lot of different tools that can help with that. Once you have the code and you're committing it to an integration and merging that, again, there's version management concerns, validating the results in the pipeline prior to completing the commits. Lots of tools there. Build and test, dynamic security testing, container security, validation, locking down containers that have been validated and white sourcing those. So SQL database injections is a big area where security tends to be a concern. Again, lots of tools. Once you have compiled artifacts and release candidates, then making sure things are digitally signed and tracked so that you're making sure you're using the same artifacts throughout the rest of the process of delivery. The acceptance testing and user acceptance testing, system acceptance testing, performing vulnerability testing there. Again, lots of tools. Release approvals, making sure that you've got metrics for security in the approval process, preparing and then deploying to production, making sure that you're using the right, tested and secure artifacts and containers. More tools. Operations, again, we're talking about chaos engineering. Social attacks is another example. Purple teams, like we mentioned, the zero trust networks and architectures. There's plenty of tools there. Post-production, you have zero trust architectures, secrets management, watching logs, again, more tools. Infrastructure as code needs to be secured. The release process needs to be secured, and value stream management systems need to be secured. So this is a tough chart to read. I understand that, but if the message really is that there's a lot to security, even over and above the core DevOps thing. So you might say it's it's not unreasonable or unexpected that focusing on DevSecOps alone is enough, or SecDevOps alone is a lot. Adding security on top of that is another whole layer. But indeed, the importance is there, and the investment is needed if you really want to defend yourself from security concerns. Okay. So if you think about value stream management and what you can do there, it's not good enough to only secure a pipeline. You want to secure the whole set of things. So security governance automation, dashboards, security analytics, pipeline exit and exit, entry and exit policies can be built into value stream management tooling to support visibility and orchestration of activities from planning, designing, integration, delivery, and production, and not just the technology and the tools, but the people and processes as well. So value stream management has, I believe, a strong role to play in continuous security and will be increasingly important as time goes on. If you think about the people aspect of value stream management, there are a lot of different people involved in building and developing, releasing, and supporting a product in production as well. Leaders tend to focus mostly at the planning stage and delivery and production phase. Developers are there pretty much until things are delivered, same as QA. Infrastructure and ops tend to be mostly concerned about getting involved in planning and delivery and production, SREs. Security is there all through the process. So this is why it really needs to be a continuous focus, with security teams collaborating with everybody else. And product management tends to mostly focus on planning and getting the plans completed, delivery. But security is there throughout the whole end-to-end process, continuously, if you like. Processes, similarly, there are a lot of processes that need to be considered as far as locking things down and secure. Gap assessments in planning, value stream mapping, security requirements, security user stories in the plans. At the design phase, there's things like threat modeling, trying to decide what frameworks to use for security, scanning, open source, secure coding standards, peer reviews that include security, static analysis, security testing, unit testing, functional testing, all with security in mind, test environment management with security in mind, infrastructure as code with security in mind. At the configuration, at the continuous integration phase of a pipeline, again, you've got SAST and DAST, static and dynamic security testing, software composition analysis, dependency checks, whitelists, blacklists, scans, test environment management again, and again, infrastructure as code concerns for deployment. In the delivery phase, again, you've got scans, penetration testing, vulnerability testing, functional testing, releasability testing, secrets management becomes even more important, dark launches going on, database encryption, again, environment management and infrastructure as code. And finally, in production, you can apply IAST and RAST, or remote and interface security test methods for scanning, security management and secrets management, logging, chaos engineering, social engineering, vulnerability scans, purple teams, the list goes on. So all of these processes, can be driven and orchestrated and made visible through value stream management. And as much as this may be, you have to consider that this is true for every value stream, and any one modern service or product may have multiple. If you think about a service or product that has lots of microservices, this could be replicated not just a few times, but even hundreds of times. So again, there's a lot to consider. That's why it is a real priority to think about all this. Similarly, the technology side, to support all those processes during each phase, there's specific tools, and the investment in tools is significant to make sure that you can support all the processes that were there in the prior slide. Finally, when you've got an idea of what you really want to do with security, you need a roadmap to build it and do it. Start with, this is the kind of thing that I do in my consulting work, help organizations understand what their roadmap should be depending on what their posture is for security and their goals for particular applications. Start with vision and goal alignment. Decide what your business security goals are. You do that through assessments, value stream mapping sessions, discussions of security priorities, and determine what culture and training requirements may exist to support that, and what metrics you're going to use for measuring success from the point of view of security. Usually the next step is to build security into the front end of the pipeline or value stream with continuous integration, code and image version controls, secure coding practices, security testing, security controls during integration, monitoring and governance at that level. You still don't actually have the first way of DevOps or SecDevOps at that point, because you've got integration but not delivery. So going further into delivery, automating staging testing, again with security tests included, delivery processes, infrastructure as code, integrating releases and deployment processes with security in mind, and building security site, service level objectives is critical. So by this time now you do have the first way of DevOps working with security, and you can move on to the second way of DevOps, and there's overlap. These are not exactly, serial. Building in more continuous feedback, security feedback can happen throughout these two phases. Ultimately, you want to get to the ultimate goal of continuous improvement, where you've got a very stable, secure pipeline with a lot of feedback, and you want to start experimenting with new ideas and more advanced methodology, let's say more advanced value stream management concepts, more advanced security controls, and more advanced things going on in production as well, to get to the third way of continuous security. It's a journey. At any point in time, you're going to find there's a gap between your problem space, the current threats and vulnerabilities and risks that are important at any moment in time, that are affecting your systems, subsystems, and features. Meanwhile, you have a solution. It's the people and process and technology aspects for your applications and infrastructures and pipelines. So there's always a gap. The question is, what do you do now? So looking at the problem space, together with the security team and the developers, identify the risk and the value of resolving those things. Meanwhile, look at the solution space and identify the cost and time it's going to take to make changes. All of those things feed into a planning process that should be a collaborative effort with security and dev and QA and ops people. Determine the priorities, build a backlog, typically an agile backlog with themes and epics and stories, and then let agile and DevOps processes, if you like, take over and deliver it and continue the cycle. So that's essentially, an ongoing story. There's not like one day you're suddenly going to be secure enough. It's an ongoing process, and this is kind of the big picture of how you deal with that. Okay, that's pretty much what I had to say about continuous security. I'm sure you guys are going to have some questions about things that I had in my talk, as well as the topic in general. So I will open up for questions.
Thank you, Mark, so much. This is a very interesting topic. I think even it has been in the market for several years, but still maintains its the novelty of this interesting process. So we're gonna invite all our attendees to start to formulating their questions. But in the meantime, since they're prepared, please tell us what are the findings that you bring to us today about your book in terms of the culture. Well, why I'm asking this, we have in Mexico, we have a culture of urgency more than prioritization. We tend to give more value to the urgency, and urgency is what is less cost to us. So what could you tell us about how we can manage the culture about SecDevOps and start the wheel spinning in our organizations?
Well, these things don't happen without a strategy and looking at kind of where you're going. But at the same time, you're not going to get there in one jump. So I think it's okay to have a culture of urgency, but don't get too far ahead of yourself, but do it in the context of a strategy. Like, take some time to do the analysis first of what you're trying to get to and what really are the vulnerabilities that are important to your particular application, and build a strategy around that. Then you can apply urgency to implement the changes needed, the gaps that I mentioned, in urgent steps, and that's a good thing, right? But look at each goal as like a leg in a journey, and apply urgency around each leg. So urgency is not a bad thing, but I wouldn't recommend you just run out and do things without the context of an overall strategy. And that's where it's a little tough. And I often find it's not just Mexico. I often find a lot of clients, they just want to jump to a conclusion without having a proper strategy. They try to bypass the assessment, they'll bypass the value stream mapping, and they'll bypass a lot of things just to say that they've got something done, and then later on they regret it. So it's better to take the time, build the strategy, and then decide, what's the first leg in the journey, do that with urgency, get it done, measure it, and then, you can determine what's the next leg in the journey. It does take time. These things don't happen overnight. It's typically a multi-year effort to get from what I'd say an early level of proficiency with SecDevOps to a more advanced level. It's many of my clients, is a 2 or 3 year effort to get to what I would call a mature SecDevOps capability. Yeah.
Great. Diego asks, how can we achieve a true commitment in cybersecurity from everyone in the organization, from every one of us?
Yeah. So, to get people to buy into the importance of it, it's kind of interesting, right? If you've never had a security breach, then people say, well, that won't happen to us. But then you have one, and all of a sudden everybody thinks that, you should have done it yesterday and it's a priority. So you have to somehow make it real. Bring in examples that are related to your industry, whatever whatever industry you're involved in, the type of company. Show that these are real vulnerabilities that are going to affect you potentially. There's very high risk. If you don't do that, then yeah, people probably won't pay a lot of attention to it. They'll say, well, that's happened to those guys, but it won't happen to us. The first time it happens, and suddenly it becomes the highest priority in the world. But to prevent that, the best way is just to really bring it home. Maybe bring in a consultant or two, or someone within the organization can point out to the leaders in the company of what the possibilities are and concerns, and maybe they'll invest. Otherwise, it'll wait until they've been bitten, which is not a good thing.
Mark, well, what would be your highlights or your tips for us when we want to start to commit to Agile practices? What do you recommend?
You want to start to Agile practices. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I will tell you that Agile and DevOps go hand in hand. That's true. It is possible to implement DevOps without Agile, but it's not very efficient. So in general, you're trying to get fast feedback. That's something that's in common between Agile and DevOps. There are plenty of, again, use cases out there that will tell you that if you don't follow Agile practices, then you're probably following a waterfall type of approach. And there's plenty of, evidence out there of why, from a quality point of view, from an efficiency point of view, from a lead time point of view, all of the different things that DevOps and Agile, support don't happen unless you evolve towards Agile. So, those that don't do it are falling behind. There's a lot of research that's backed up by reality. So again, it's a matter of convincing people to do it, and then bring in people that have already bought in, that have participated before, that are the Agile coaches and so on, to take the lead. You don't necessarily have to have them forever, but to kickstart some projects and start showing the value and get some measures in place and demonstrating the value with some lead applications, what I call model applications, some that are going to show value on an ongoing basis, and then make that visible, and then it'll start becoming a dominant method that people will use.
Cool. Mark, talking about the professionals, we know that going to a course and getting a certificate is not enough. What would be the roadmap? What could be the overview or the general points that cybersecurity professionals must develop? Abilities, skills. What should we develop?
Yeah, so I do. Besides being a a consultant, I also do training. So I actually do offer, I'm one of the authors of some of the courses for the DevOps Institute, for example, and I offer DevSecOps and SecDevOps training to clients, including some large, government agencies, let alone enterprises. So start with a good understanding of foundation level. The types of things the DevOps Institute offers are at that level. The best practices, the concepts, I would recommend start there. Don't just dive into specific tools. That's a mistake I think a lot of people make. I look at learning as kind of a tree. I like the concept of learning tree. The company, that's one of the companies I work with, where you teach the branches and the trunk of the tree first, and before you worry about the leaves of the tree. And I think that's good advice for individuals as well. But there are so many specialties within the security realm. Once you get a common general foundations level of understanding, which you can get by your own self-study, but it's quicker and more organized if you take, foundations level courses. Then you can dive into certain specialties, whether it's defensive type security with, SRE type things, or more, SecDevOps type things that are more preventative. There are a lot of special courses out there. If you just want to be a security expert, not necessarily a DevSecOps person or an SRE, then things like CCISP and some of those certifications are perfectly valid. One of my sons went through that whole process, and he's now, a security expert for a company, just doing self-certification, online courses and things like that. You don't have to have a university degree to become a security expert, or even a DevSecOps or an SRE expert for that matter. So a lot of self-study and just taking your own initiatives. I do recommend, though, that, follow the path of getting good foundation level training first before you dive into a specialty. I think that makes a lot of sense. That's something I believe in.
Trying to expand or including in this topic about developing in the academy, what would be the role of the academy of the university in cybersecurity topics?
Yeah, so a lot of universities are offering similar courses. University, for the most part, is giving you a general education rather than specific training. The community colleges and that tend to be more focused on training. But I think getting a broad education in security is a good thing. It's kind of like an extension of what I was just saying. Get a good foundational level training before you try to branch into specific training on one topic. I do see more and more universities getting involved in things like DevSecOps. I've been a consultant with some of them to give them some advice on how to build DevSecOps training, mostly at the senior levels, not so much at the undergraduate level, but at the master's degree type level or specialty course level. A lot of universities getting involved in that. It's certainly a hot topic. If you look at the job markets for SREs and security professionals and DevOps, they're right, at the top of the list in terms of not having enough people to serve the needs of, the growing needs of enterprises and agencies and manufacturers and the industry. So there's definitely a pull going on.
Cool. Mark, I want to enter in a maybe dangerous area.
Okay.
We know that in the IT universe, ITL it's a giant. It's a really huge competitor about best practices. And one of the main concerns when ITL 4 came into the market was, well, is ITL trying to expand to other best practices and keep it all from itself? What in the sight of an expert like you are, what could you tell us about the synergy or the challenges that ITL plus DevSecOps means for an organization?
Well, you're saying ITIL in particular.
ITIL.
Yeah. So there, first of all, there's no universal framework, and ITIL has a role to play, and it's especially good at having defined procedures and processes that can even be called up in audits because they're pretty well defined. The other frameworks that are related are Agile and DevOps and lean manufacturing and SRE. There's a list of other related frameworks. Even waterfall, I suppose, could be considered a framework. There is no, standard though, and there's certainly no universal framework. So the more you can learn about all the different frameworks, the better. I don't imagine there's going to be any universal framework anytime soon, if ever, because they're all evolving. If you look at what happened with Agile, if you look at what happened with ITIL, they all have new versions once in a while, and they're evolving, and they all try to essentially encroach on the other space a little bit. So the latest versions of Agile, for example, encapsulate some of the DevOps concepts. Latest versions of ITIL encapsulate some of the DevOps concepts and Agile concepts. These are all good things. It's a little bit dizzying if you're an individual and you're having to learn all these things at once. That's part of the reason why I think, it does take time and maturity to build a career around all these things, and start with one area and then build from there, right? If you're going to start from the ops end of the spectrum of things, then ITIL is not a bad thing to learn together with SRE practices. If you're starting more from a development end, then Agile and DevOps makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it is a little bit daunting. There's a lot to learn all at once. Even a lot of experts are focusing in one thing or another. I often run into groups that'll say, hey, do you know what ITIL is? If it's a development team, they almost invariably say, no, they don't know what ITIL is. If it's an operations team, and I ask them what is, have you worked with Agile and DevOps? Often they say no, but they're coming together more and more. They're meeting in the middle, essentially. And that's part of the point of what I was trying to say with this talk, with continuous security. It's not good enough to only look at it from a production end point of view or from a development end point of view. You really need, both to make a complete picture. That's what I was trying to say. And yeah, there are very few people that understand all of the different ends of things. It takes time to get experience and practice, all of it, the whole end-to-end spectrum from development through to in production.
Totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
So more and more the organizations invest in training and developing professionals to have the most efficient best practices for IT. But we have this notion that the cyber delinquency, the cyber crime, it's gaining terrain. Why do you think this is happening? Why do you think the cyber delinquency is winning the battle?
Yeah, so I tried to explain that in one of the charts that I presented. I think there's a natural law, like something about entropy. Systems tend to get more complex over time. As we add more and more features to them, then we try to compartmentalize those things to make them manageable. It's kind of like the breaking down, a big monolith into, microservices. You think, well, it will be less complex if we make little things out of a big thing that's complicated. Well, you end up with something else that's complicated. You have to manage many little things instead of having one big thing. It turns out that, there are benefits if you do break it into little things. But as you do that, you now have a lot of more surfaces to deal with. Rather than one surface on a big monolith, you now have surfaces on many microservices that potentially are exposed. That's just a microcosm of what's happening in the industry overall, right? If you think about what's happening with infrastructure, things are going more and more towards micro to nano, to, functions as a service and things like that. There are more things that could be attacked, but it's a natural tendency to do it because there's value. From a business point of view, you can be quicker and more nimble if you build the processes around it. The same things for applications, the same thing as for pipelines and the processes. So it's kind of natural that as we get more sophisticated, there are more surfaces to attack, and it's harder to defend them. So it is a constant race. You're going to have defensive and preventive strategies that are able to keep up with the the evolution of the systems themselves. And that's why I think we've got now this problem where it's almost out of hand, where you've got a lot of things that need to be learned to understand how to cope with all this complexity, right? And so we've got more complex systems to deal with it, but that adds more complexity too. Some people say, well, therefore we need artificial intelligence to think for us instead, because we can't think hard enough or big enough to deal with all these problems. I don't know. I think that's just yet another set of attack surfaces and complexities to deal with. We shall see. There's no easy answer. The good news is it gives lots of people some good jobs to think about it and work on.
We need to install the VUCA chip on every one of us. No?
Yeah, either that or we all need to become Mennonites or something and forget about all these sophisticated systems and just go back to having horse-drawn carriages and, and the simple systems.
Yeah. Mark, let's finish with your top 3 recommendations, your top 3 advices that we could that start moving us in the DevSecOps field.
Well, again, if you're an organization trying to deal with security concerns, then I always say start with a strategy, like understand what your requirements are and build a strategy around that. Make sure you take into account the full scope of things. So that's one part. Part of that also needs to be, the people, right? The training, hiring, upskilling. So that's another factor. The best strategy alone isn't going to work if you don't have people to implement it that are competent. And I think finally the culture, if you don't have the right culture, I don't care what your strategy is. The late great Peter Drucker said that, strategy, culture eats a strategy, which is true, right? So you really have to be concerned about your culture, not just, at the company level, certainly, the culture has to embrace these concerns and give them priority.
Yeah, I totally agree. Mark, thank you so much from all the team, VP Gurus and SDI. We thank you for your time. Thank you for all your knowledge. Hay que recordar al público que está disponible ya el libro de Marc Hornbeek para que tengan ahí, y lo dijo muy claramente, es un libro totalmente táctico en donde la estrategia ya está definida y que te va a acompañar totalmente en este camino de la transición hacia un mejor camino de DevSecOps. Bien, pues no me queda más que agradecerles a todos la participación. Muchísimas gracias. Aquí estamos cerrando la ronda de conferencias del SDI y les recordamos que las grabaciones van a estar siendo subidas a nuestro canal de YouTube de manera paulatina para que estén pendientes esta semana y la próxima semana y puedan ustedes volver a revivir cada una de estas charlas. A nombre de todo el equipo de VP Gurus y de SDI, les agradecemos su participación, su estancia. Esto es SDI 21MX, el futuro es hoy.
SDI 21MX es posible gracias a... SDI 21MX. El futuro es hoy.